Unshelling Medicine Podcast. Healthcare in the language we understand.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our episode today. I have the pleasure of having Matt Friedman with us. Matt Friedman is the CEO of the Mekong Club. He's going to get into that and tell us all about why he has this business. And unfortunately, we need humans like him because some humans are just disgusting. So we are going to talk about a crisis that really should not exist in this day and age. But unfortunately, we do have predators. So if you are in the healthcare sector or simply a human being, we're going to talk about something that can be sensitive. So please, if we start a conversation and it's too much for you, it's okay for you to disengage. However, if you want to learn how you can be a mandated reporter or preventer of these crises, please pull up a chair. I'm learning as well. Let's all learn together so we can make the world around us a better place. So without further ado, welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. I'm very grateful you made time for us today. So, Matt, I think everybody's curious. You're the CEO of the Mekong Club. What does the Mekong Club do? And why did you get into doing something focused on helping other humans?
Well, let me start from the beginning before I talk about the Mekong Club and kind of describe a little bit about my journey. So 35 years ago, I was working for USAID, and I was based in Nepal. And my job was basically to take resources that the U.S. government had related to health and translate that into healthier people. And at that time, we were finding girls 12, 13 years old who were HIV positive. Couldn't understand what was going on. That's a very, very conservative culture. So we started to go and interview the women and the girls in the shelters. And we heard pretty much the same story over and over again. And it went something like this. Human traffickers would go into a village and they'd flash a bunch of money around. They wanted people to think they were rich. They'd then say, I'm looking for a wife. I don't want an urban wife. I want a village wife. They'd find a girl, 12, 13 years old, befriend her, then go to the family and say, I'd like to marry your daughter. The family's thinking, wow, he's rich, he's handsome, he's going to marry our daughter, he's going to take care of her and us. Everybody's happy. In that part of the world, it's not unusual to marry at that age. A couple of days later, they have a wedding ceremony. After that, the trafficker goes to the family and says, I'm going to take your daughter to the capital, Kathmandu, but don't worry, I'll be back in 3 months. But that's not what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Instead, he takes her to Mumbai, India, to the red light district where the brothels are. Now, this girl's never been more than 20 kilometers away from her village. When she's in India, she thinks she's still in Nepal. When he gets to this location, he says to his wife, I'm going to put you in this room. I'll be back in a few minutes. Just stay here. So she's thinking, wow, why am I here? Who are all these people? No, don't leave me. He says, it's okay. I'll be right back. He goes to the madam who runs the brothel to get the $500 for having sold her to the brothel. He has the gold from the wedding, and he hands the wedding pictures over to the madam. He then leaves to go back to Nepal to do this again and again, maybe 40, 50 times in the year. The madam then goes into the room where the girl is and says, guess what? Your husband just sold you to me, and you're going to be with 20 guys a day, every day, because I say so. You can imagine this girl shocked. No, my husband loves me. No, that's what happened. When many of these girls internalize what's going on, they say, I will kill myself before I do those shameful things. I'm a good Hindu girl. The madam then brings out the photograph of the wedding and says, is this your mom, your dad, your brother? If you hurt yourself, we'll hurt them. So she's trapped in this situation. In order to make her into a prostitute, it's quite simple. You shame her. So they bring in a bunch of guys and they use her over and over and over till she eventually just lays back and accepts what happens to her. After that, she will be put on the line, which means that she'll be with 20 guys a day, every day, until after a couple of years, she gets what's called black eye, where she's so depleted physically and emotionally that nobody wants her. So they throw her out onto the street. So I was hearing this story over and over again from the girls who actually made it back to Nepal. Many of them didn't. They died of AIDS in India. But I didn't understand the evil of it until I actually went to those brothels. I was invited by the Indian government to do public health checks, had a police officer with me. went into one of the brothels, and an 11-year-old girl saw this Caucasian guy, literally ran up, wrapped herself around me and said, save me, save me. They're doing terrible things to me. I looked down at this child who was hysterically crying. I turned to the police officer and said, we need to get this girl out of here. He said, we can't do that. So what are you talking about? You're a police officer. He says, if we try to leave with her now, we'll both be killed. To make a long story short, we left. We came back with a lot more police, but of course she was gone. Now, I tell that story because I wasn't one of those 15-year-olds that said when I grow up, I want to become an activist. In fact, I did everything I could not to. But every once in a while in life, we are tested. That was my big test. I failed miserably. After that, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I did what a lot of activists eventually do. Surrendered to the fact that now that I've been exposed to this, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And 35 years later, here I am talking to you.
Oh my God, that is so heavy. Did you ever find out what happened to that girl that was missing the next day?
No, and the thing is that they probably knew the police were coming. They took her away. I can only imagine that bad things happened to her because you're not supposed to kind of go against the house. And so, like we're talking about when it comes to human trafficking, a lot of people don't know that there's 50 million people in what's called human trafficking or modern slavery. In the United States, they call it human trafficking. The rest of the world call it modern slavery. Out of that, about 23 million would be forced marriages, where a person is forced to enter a marriage where they're there just to work within the family. 27 million would be forced labor, of which 6.3 million would be women and girls in forced prostitution. And so we're talking about a large number of people. In the United States, it's estimated there's about 1 million people in human trafficking. That includes sex trafficking, that could be forced labor, could be domestic servitude. So even in the United States, we're talking about a large number of people in this situation.
So how is this so insidious and ongoing? That's the one thing that is boggling my mind. How is it that it does exist and it exists out in the open and there's nothing much being done in the sense of addressing it?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of NGOs that work on this. There's also the United Nations, governments, law enforcement. But the reality is that out of the 50 million people that we're talking about, last year the world only helped 133,000 out of this situation. That's 0.2%. Part of the reason for that, the profits generated from this are about 236 billion US dollars. The amount of money that's available globally is about 400 million, which is 0.13% of the profits. The other thing, the do-gooder types like us around the world is about 40,000 of us against 500,000 greed-incentivized criminals. And lastly, most people don't really know much about this issue. I do a lot of talks all over the world, and I get in front of 200 people, and I'll tell them about human trafficking. And about 15 minutes into my talk, I'll ask how many people in this room knew anything about human trafficking, and I usually don't get more than 1 or 2 hands. Yeah. If you don't know about an issue, you're not going to care. If you don't care, you're not going to do anything. So the question in the U.S. is a good one. After 35 years, I still can't understand how this terrible scenario, let's just take in Atlanta, 12-year-old girl who's on the street, she's been trafficked by virtue of her age. If she's under 18 and she's in prostitution, she's a victim of human trafficking. How is it that we can have that girl be with 4 or 5 men a day, maybe more, times, hundreds? I don't understand it. And I think part of it is the crime is clandestine, and it's hard for people to know where it's happening or how it's happening. And even if you do arrest somebody, it's very complicated to get a conviction because all the steps that are needed. And that may account for the reason why we don't have a lot of more victims being helped.
That is sad. That is very, very sad. So, you mentioned your experience in the healthcare sector. Unfortunately, by the time the healthcare sector gets involved or is aware of a trafficked human, is at a point of treatment where it's too late for some of these girls, not all of them. So what can we do better in the healthcare industry to recognize? Because sometimes people come in as an uncle, as an aunt, right? Her mom is not with me, or, she just came to spend the summer with me or the winter with me or whatever the case. I'm a guardian, but the parents are not here. So what are those things that healthcare providers or workers should look out for when these unfortunate situations happen?
Well, I mean, I'll start. I'm based in Hong Kong in Asia, so I'll start with that, and then I'll segue to the North America. So, I mean, what we train healthcare providers to look for is a person who comes in who seems emotionally traumatized, maybe bruised because she's been beaten up by her pimp, or reproductive genitals and so forth are traumatized. She's with somebody who isn't a family member or presents themselves as a family member, but really there's no connection there. When she's in the healthcare system, there's somebody minding her or watching her. She has STIs of various sorts, and that's part of the reason why she is coming for medical help. Sometimes there's a forced abortion where they'll go into a clinic and they'll do an abortion. It's not a sanitary clinic, and she gets septic, and so she's brought into the hospital and so forth. So these would be the telltale signs in Asia where we retrain the healthcare people. But to a certain extent, it's the same in North America, the same types of things. My son is an emergency room doctor, and he has faced a certain number of these cases himself. And after a while, the telltale signs are there. It just, that there's something wrong with this person, that she is under the control of somebody, because you can just see it in her eyes, in her expression, in the way she kind of looks at the person who brought her in. There's obviously a power dynamic that's taking place in that situation.
So what should the next action be? Because in my line of work or my training, when something like that is suspected, that's when you get law enforcement involved as mandated reporters. That's why I use that term while introducing the segment. How much of that mandated reporting yields results? Because in the American justice system, you're innocent until proven guilty,
Yes.
right? And there's also the safety aspect for the healthcare workers, because again, none of this syndicates, in a sense, operate independently. It's usually a group of people. Like you mentioned in India, that the police officer informed you that if you left with the girl, both of you will be killed.
Yes.
So what are we doing to protect the people who are mandated reporters, the teachers, the healthcare workers across the gamut, doctors, nurses, you name it? What are we doing to protect those people? And how much is law enforcement really taking this report seriously? Because sometimes it takes months. Investigation takes months. And unfortunately, these people are not just sitting duck, right, waiting for the investigation. More and more girls are being abducted and trafficked.
Yeah, I mean, in this part of the world, there's no mandate to report if, in fact, somebody comes in. Whereas in the United States, if it is seems like child abuse, or it seems like abuse of a woman, and certain other things, suicidal tendencies and so forth, there's legislation that requires that somebody reports this. What I've heard from health professionals in North America is that there's a certain procedure that is made where an assessment is made, and then separate from the victim, you go out and you have a conversation with your supervisor, and then there's a protocol that's followed. Whether it's a battered woman or a child abuse case or whatever, it would be exactly the same case for human trafficking. I have not heard of a single situation where the retribution was made against the healthcare person, because the trafficker doesn't want to get into more issues and problems. He just wants his sex trafficking victim back so they can bring her back out into the street and so forth. But I mean, it may be that that's the only chance she's ever going to get in order to get out of this situation, because many of them are kind of isolated from authorities or isolated from people who could see what's taking place. But this is an interaction with an administration. And so it's really important for healthcare workers to have basic understanding of this topic, to know the red flag indicators, to also know what needs to be done in order to address this. Because, I've seen young women who are in this situation that have been helped at a critical time that changed their life for the better, because they had that one interaction that allowed them to be pulled out of the system and for that person to be prosecuted and taken away. And so that's my advice, is that the health facilities really need to understand the relevance and the importance of this. And we do a lot of training here of social workers and medical doctors and nurses and other support staff on this topic in Asia, so that if an opportunity to kind of help somebody comes up, they can actually do that.
Yeah. So we've spoken about the healthcare providers. The one critical part that I see, and it's no different from slavery that happened on the African continent, where deception was primarily the reason why people were trafficked and,
Yes.
brought to America for slavery. But, that narrative was skewed, it's the same thing. So what should parents, especially parents, and we have the blessing and the fortune of having people listen to this podcast globally. So we're not just talking to the parents in North America who may have resources or may have knowledge of, certain things to look out for, or who at least may have, not everybody, but who may have resources to at least survive. So in any continent right now, parents listening to us, what are the signs that parents should watch out for? Because from the story you told, the deception started with the very nucleus of people these young ladies trusted or know to defend them, which is the family, right? Everybody's rejoicing, everybody's having a wedding and all of that stuff, just because of the false premise of being able to provide financially. So what are those things that parents should look out for? In North America, it happens quite a bit, and it still shocks me to this day, right? What are the telltale signs for the parents? And then we'll get to another group of people.
Okay, well, I'm going to give a scenario that I've heard both in China and in the USA that is almost identical, and it's young people being on chat lines. So they get into a chat group, and let's say that you have a 13, 14-year-old girl. She is feeling awkward. She's not feeling appreciated. Maybe she doesn't have as many friends. And all of a sudden, somebody on the other end of a chat says, wow, you're beautiful. You're wonderful. You're amazing. I'm a 16-year-old boy. You're 14 years old. And so she thinks she has this boyfriend online through the chat rooms. In reality, it's a 55-year-old guy who maybe has 6 computers open, and he's grooming girls along the way. And I've heard this scenario both in China and the United States. They go back and forth. They're exchanging pictures, and then they agree to meet. And so there's a 16-year-old boy who's a criminal who's brought in to be her boyfriend. He hasn't been communicating with her, but they meet up in a particular, let's say, coffee shop, and then maybe they drive to a park, and he gives her a Coca-Cola that's laced with a roofie. And so she falls asleep. And then 2 hours, 3 hours later, she wakes up in a motel room naked. And then with all these compromising photos having been taken of her, and then they basically say, well, if you don't do what we say, we are going to share this with your school, your Facebook friends, your family. And because of the fear of, the embarrassment associated with that, many of these girls can be manipulated. Sometimes they're actually taken directly away to another state and then forced into prostitution. This is quite standard. I mean, it's not just girls too; it's boys in some cases as well. So it happens to both boys and girls. So what we're dealing with here, and the point that you started with is deception. Another scenario is a girl who is approached in a mall by a guy who says, wow, you're really beautiful. I'm an agent for a modeling company, and, you can make lots of money. And let's meet, and you'll meet a couple of other young women who have been involved in this, and we'll sit down, and then he gives her, $100 to basically say, okay, this is a upfront payment. We're going to be doing some more, and then lures the girl into a scenario where she feels like she is going to do a photo shoot. He picks her up in a van, and then they take her off to another location. And then threaten her family, basically saying, if you try to run, if you try to do anything, we have your family's picture. We know where they are. We're going to hurt your sister. We're going to hurt your brother, and so forth. These kind of things are very much a part of what we see in the human trafficking world. And as a result of that, that's why we have 6.3 million women and girls and some boys in this scenario globally. So what parents can do is, number one, is they need to learn about this. They
Yes.
need to learn. They need to understand that there are these characters that are out there.
Yeah.
And you need to educate your kids that if you don't know the person who's on the other end of a chat, and it looks like that person really wants to get to know you, and in a short period of time, they're just talking about how wonderful you are and so forth, that's a scam. That definitely is a scam for sure.
So, everything begins in the home. And sometimes parents think it's too early to have certain conversation. Is that a make believe? Is there any point that this conversation is too early to have?
Well, I mean, that's like a fundamental question in different parts of the world. When do you introduce sex education? When do you introduce the potential for abuse and various other things taking place? In some countries in Europe, they start in kindergarten. A lot of locations are like, well, we shouldn't have the conversation because if we do, it'll elicit a sense of them going off and trying new things and so forth. That's just not the way it works. I think you have to be reinforcing these messages very early. Because if you don't, then in the two of us, when we were growing up, how many times did we hear, don't take candy from strangers, don't get into strangers' car? The world was a lot less complicated than it is now.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways of engaging young people that could result in an outcome of them being tricked and deceived. The sexploitation is another thing that we see, where there's an engagement between a couple of young people, and they're getting to know each other. And then eventually he says, well, why don't you show a little skin? And then basically once you get to a point where something is actually shown, then he leverages either money or, where you have to show more, or I'm going to show this to everybody, only getting deeper and deeper into that. But what often happens is the teenager is so ashamed and so feels so guilty, they don't tell anyone. In one of those cases where there was a sexploitation here in China, and even what seemed to be about a human trafficking case, the young woman went to the parents instead of and took that risk, basically saying, okay, well, I'm going to go to my parents because I'm going to explain it to them. Parents immediately called law enforcement. They were able to go after this person. So you have to say to your youngsters that never hide anything if you feel like you have an issue or problem in your life. We're here for you. We love you. We want to be here for you. We want to support you, that type of thing.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, there was a case recently, I think it was either this year or last year, here in the United States, where a young man who was discovering himself sexually was engaged in like a sexploitation where it was like a same-sex kind of exchange. And
Yes.
the person threatened to release the photos, and unfortunately, he took his life. And that is just a very sad end to a very crazy things people do. And unfortunately, this is the part that really gets to me. Unfortunately, the person who was on the other end who caused that does not have a sense of pause to not do that to somebody else. They
That's
just
right.
go and find another victim.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I'll give another example. It's not human trafficking, but it has a similar case. There was a scam going on in India where on your phone, it would say if you want to borrow something like 14,000 rupees, which isn't a lot of money, and then pay it back after 3 months, you get it at a 2% interest rate. And so people would press a button which allowed these scammers to get into their phone. And once they got into their phone, after a couple of months, they'd say, well, you have to start paying this back. And the person would pay what the amount was with interest, but then they'd say, you have to pay more, you have to pay more, you have to pay more. And if you didn't, what they did is because they had access to the phone, they knew your Facebook account, they knew your family, they knew your address, they knew everything. They started threatening them that we're going to show things. And so then they used AI to superimpose this person's face on naked bodies and so forth. And in India, there's few things that are more shameful than your sexuality being exposed. And so it's the same thing. A lot of young people actually kill themselves over this because they were just so ashamed that they got themselves in this situation.
Yeah.
I guess the bottom line is, I don't know whether schools are doing it in North America. We do it here. I do training at schools, high schools here in Hong Kong, where we go in and we say, these are the things that you need to do to protect yourself. whether it's don't get to know people on chats
Yeah.
or make your friends among the people you can see and, within your network and so forth, because you never know what's on the other end of
Yeah.
that chat.
I think there's a semblance of that, but North America, everything is very highly politicized, and things that are meant to be helpful, people read too much into it. But if you can talk to a young person listening to us, which again, another blessing, we have a good population of young people on grandparents as well. What is the one thing that, or a few things that young people can do in the age of, text messaging, in the age of social media platform, in the age of, chat rooms like you mentioned? What should be the thing that, yes, we cannot isolate them from their peers and what their peers are doing. However, there should be safeguards. What should a young person, implement as their flags, whether red or green, to make sure that they don't fall into the wrong hands?
Don't share personal information
Mm.
online, period. Just don't share it. I mean, even photos can be manipulated and used. With AI being what it is now, people can take those photographs and they can superimpose all kinds of images on that. It really isn't worth it. And I know that that's kind of like the trend. You want to show that you're having a lot of fun and, you just had this big event and everything else. But sharing, too many of those photos and also just basic information about yourself, where you live, and what high school you go to and so forth, when you don't know who's on the other end. No, that's just not right. When you have Facebook friends, let's say, come in, or Instagram friends or whatever, and you don't know who these people are, don't accept them. You don't need to. Find the circle of people that you know and stay within that circle, because there's people all over the world that are just looking to take advantage. And the point that you made about how, like that suicide case in the United States, and that person went just on to somebody else and they didn't care. I can say from my experience that that's exactly the way it is.
Yeah.
So I lived and worked in Bangladesh, and we would go into the prisons to interview the traffickers. Because, if you really want to learn about human trafficking, there's two ways. You talk to the victims or you talk to the traffickers, because they have the actual experience. And as part of that process, you got a sense of like how they just didn't care about anything. And so, like in the prison, initially they say, "Oh, I'm a victim, I shouldn't be here," but they're narcissists. So I'm standing in front of Ali and I look over and I say, "Muhammad is the best criminal I ever met. He's the smartest guy I could possibly imagine." Ali Luke says, he's not smarter than me.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what I've done. And they start telling you all the things that they're doing and so forth. But these are people who have no consideration for other people. They will use and abuse children or whatever. They just are sociopaths. They don't care. They don't have any compassion. They don't have any empathy. They don't have any guilt. They don't have any shame. And they would basically say, well, if she ended up in one of our brothels, it's on her. If she was stupid enough to fall for what I had to offer, it's on her. So she's the one who allowed this to happen. These guys will say, well, we put women in prostitution because, like, that protects other good girls, okay? Because men can then use these girls and then they're not going to go and rape these other ones. That's how they justify it. So, I mean, these are just really bizarre kind of perspectives that people have related to exploitation. And it's the same, the typical situation in the United States for a long time was a broken family or incest within the family or abuse in the family, or a girl has been raped. She's feeling shame. She's feeling broken, having difficulties with her parents. They have a big fight. She goes and gets on a bus, goes to the city, and she wants to go back, but she doesn't have enough money. The pimps are in those bus stations looking for those girls. And what they'll do is they'll take them in and they'll shower them with love and affection for a period of time until an emotional relationship has been developed. And then in order to demonstrate her love, he'll say, well, you have to go and sleep with other men. I need the money and I need it for this and this and this. And if you really love me, you would do this. This scenario has been around for, I don't know how many years. It's over and over again. We've heard this. And, these are just things that are there.
So let's talk about familiarity and as we wrap up our conversation. And you're yet to talk about the Mekong Club. I won't let you forget that. So let's talk about familiarity, because in the case of molestation, usually it's somebody within, somebody close by. It's usually not a stranger. So have you found cases where family members or trusted people are kind of like used as a lure to get young girls and boys into a compromising position attached to trafficking? Or is it usually a stranger posing as a good-hearted husband to be?
We've seen both. People in this part of the world, they say they were so poor that they sold their daughter into prostitution. I hear that all the time. That doesn't really happen as much as people think. And the reason for that is whether you're rich or poor, you still love your kids. Now, in a serious kind of dysfunctional family with maybe drug abuse or alcohol abuse and so forth, we've seen cases where one of the parents will actually be involved. But generally, if there is family involvement, it's an uncle, it's a nephew, it's somebody else who gets and takes advantage of a family member. I had a case in Bangladesh where the nephew of this young woman from Bangladesh wanted money so that he could start a business. He couldn't get it, so he heard that he could sell his cousin. So he brought her to a brothel, and she was forced there. And he knew he could get away with it because if she ever got out of the brothel and got home, she wasn't going to say what happened to her, because in a lot of this part of the world, there's no forgiveness. If you are identified as having been in prostitution, whether you were a victim or not, you still would bring shame to the family and so forth. So he understands that he can get away with this because if she comes back, many of them don't. They end up with AIDS and they die and so forth. He can get away with this type of thing. But usually in many of the villages and many of the towns that I've been in, it's within the community that the trafficker is there, because the trafficker basically needs to know who these people are. The stranger coming in and just offering an opportunity, most parents won't allow their kid to just go away with a stranger, but they might allow for them to go with somebody who's within the community. And maybe the person is taken away, and then the guy says, well, I took her to India. She was supposed to go into a house, and she was going to be a domestic worker, but when I got there, she just disappeared, and I don't know what happened to her. When in fact, actually, he sold her to the brothel. So, I mean, these scenarios we see on a regular basis.
But that is a really, I don't want to sound high and mighty. However, how often can one person have the same story where you've taken more than one girl and the same thing has happened where they keep running away after you leave with them? Shouldn't that be a cautionary tale for more parents, or it's unfortunately a survival thing?
Okay, so I'll talk about forced labor. So I'm in Myanmar, and I'm in a village, and I'm training a community about forced labor in Thailand. So anyone who migrates to Thailand has the potential to end up in a forced labor circumstance. And as I'm telling that, a woman raises her hand and says, well, I don't understand what you're talking about. A lot of our husbands and our sons have gone to Thailand, and they've all come back and had none of these issues you're talking about. And then they point to them. They're over in this corner over here. And I knew that every one of those guys was trafficked, but not a single one of them came back and said they were trafficked. And the reason for that is that in this part of the world, you don't want to lose face. So you lie about your experience. And so all of the reality of how people get into human trafficking is lost on the community because nobody's ever talking about it. So the way we address that is we develop a soap opera series. So it's 10 episodes, 1 hour long. We use actors and actresses and we dramatize it and so forth so that you can show what happens to people. And maybe there's one family that has protectiveness and they do all the right things. And the other one, has human trafficking. And then you see the person who's trafficked and they come back and they lie about the experience when in fact the audience already saw what happened to them. So in local TV, they'll show those things, it's in the local language and so forth, or you get a DVD and you just give it off to the villages and they'll put it in a computer and they'll watch it over and over again. But somehow you have to sensitize people to the fact that like what we're dealing with here is really happening. Maybe you're not going to have anyone tell you that in your community, but I'm telling you, from real experiences. So this is a reality within this part of the world.
Heavy stuff.
And let me just say this, in the United States, if you're a victim, you say so. And there's compassion and empathy and love, and people will try to help you and so forth. But many other parts of the world, it's not like that. In Latin America, certain parts, in Africa, certain parts of Asia. And I'll tell you a story. There was a young girl. This was a kidnapping, and most of the cases aren't. But she was a 16-year-old girl walking down the street. A van pulls up, pulls her in. They get her over to the border into Calcutta, and she's used for 2 weeks. And then we were able to rescue her and get her back to Bangladesh. And so I was basically with the NGO person and myself and the victim, and we were driving back to her house. But somehow word got out that she ended up in the brothel when we got there. So it's me, her, and the NGO person. And then there's the father, the mother, and the kids on the other side. And she just wanted to run up to her mom and just get a hug. And father put up his hand and says, "You can't come home." She says, "What do you mean I can't come home?" She says, "You can't come home. You brought shame to the family." She said, "I didn't do anything. I was walking down the street. It doesn't matter. There's your brothers and sisters won't be able to get married if we bring you home. You have brought shame to the family." And you knew this guy loved his daughter. He wanted to go up to her, but the traditional systems and procedures in that part of the world prevented him from allowing this person who had experienced shameful acts, even though she didn't do anything to do with them. It's just the reality of what happens in this part of the world. I've seen it time and time again.
And then what happens? Where can she go?
Well, this particular girl, she was just so heart-struck. She stayed at the shelter for a couple of weeks, and then she just wandered off. We never knew what happened to her. I think she died of a broken heart, honestly. I mean, here it is. She all of a sudden, her life is one way, and then it's not. And
Cry.
Yeah, it's just terrible, terrible situation. I mean, I probably cried at that time too. And I was watching the father and the mother. The mother she was about to run up, and the father held her back, and the brothers and sisters, they were younger. They didn't understand what was going on. They couldn't understand why they couldn't run up to their sister. Wow. It was a terrible, terrible situation.
Awful.
Yeah.
That's awful. Oh my goodness gracious Lord. That's awful. Matt, please tell us about the Mekong Club.
Okay, so, I spent 17 years working for USAID, working on human trafficking. That includes sex trafficking, forced labor. Then I spent 6 years working for the United Nations. But I was frustrated with both organizations. They're big bureaucracies, and it takes forever for them to move forward. And so I decided I was going to work with the private sector. So I set up the Mekong Club, and we work with banks, we work with manufacturers, we work with retailers, we work with the hospitality sector, and we help them to understand the issue of human trafficking so that within their big business, there is no possibility of a nexus between their business and this issue. So you might ask, well, why would the banks care about this? If $236 billion is generated that's illegal, if any of that money gets into a legitimate bank, it's money laundering, and the bank gets fined. There was an Australian bank that was fined 1.3 billion Australian dollars. So the banks try to do everything they can to ensure that none of their money is associated with this. Manufacturers and retailers have supply chains where they make things. Somewhere in that supply chain, there could be a sweatshop. We help them to ensure that they can see their supply chain, find these sweatshops and close them down so that it doesn't affect their business. Hospitality sector, it's sex trafficking. So, in the United States, for example, 14, 15-year-old girl is used in a motel. The motel can be sued for that. And the problem for those industries is they can't get insurance anymore because of this. So we work with them, and despite what a lot of people feel, like the private sector will do anything and everything they can to avoid being associated with this because it can have a reputational risk. It can hurt their clientele. But by them fixing it, they also protect people as well. So we work with the private sector because there's a sense of urgency. The moment they realize there's a potential problem, they call us in, we come in, we go and help them. And that helps us to prevent human trafficking.
So do you find that a lot of private organizations are willing to do this? Again, talking about organization, we know that usually it's like a network. Do you feel like, in your experience, that there's certain people who establish these businesses like motels and hotels just to house, and they have their own way of, keeping things under wraps?
Yeah, I mean, we would work with some of the biggest businesses in the world. So these are businesses that are by nature responsible. What you're describing is like a motel that is basically a brothel.
Yeah.
Obviously, they wouldn't be working with us. They don't want to fix their business. They know they're doing illegal activities and so forth. But I mean, in the United States, I think the number of cases that resulted in prosecutions out of the thousands of perpetrators is probably less than 1,000 convictions. So globally, the number of convictions of traffickers last year was about 8,000. That's with all over the world. And again, this is the point that bothers me most. Out of the 50 million people in modern slavery, human trafficking, last year the world helped 133,000, 0.2%. So I mean, this is the thing that brings me into depression sometimes. I've been doing this for 35 years, and yet we are not even hitting 1% of the victims that are out there. And, a lot of it has to do with distraction. You see what's happening with the politics in the United States. You have Brexit in the UK, and you have the Ukraine war and the Iran and all these other things going on. And so it's not business as usual. So, people aren't taking time to kind of look at some of the issues and the problems of our time. And as a result of that, they keep getting worse. So whether it's human trafficking or poverty or girls' education or disparity or any of these things, collectively, we are not making a difference. And I'll give a story that just to reflect this. And so years ago when I was in Nepal and I was seeing a lot of these trafficking cases, I decided that I was going to write a book. As part of this book process, I went from shelter to shelter to interview the women and the girls. I went to one shelter and there was a girl named Geeta. And every time I approached her for her story, she said, no, I don't want to give it. But as I interviewed everyone else, she was sitting right there. So when I was done and I was leaving, Geeta comes running up and says, I changed my mind. You can have my story. So I said, that's great. Okay, well, so she sat on one side of the table. There were a number of us on the other side of the table. And over a 3-hour period, she told the worst story I'd ever heard of rape and torture and disease and murder and betrayal. I honestly didn't know what to say to this girl. It was just so bad that the story was just so horrific. So finally, I turned to her and I said, wow, Geeta, you must be so angry at the traffickers for the horrible things they did to you. She paused and paused. Then she said, no, I'm angry at you and you and you. She pointed at us. She said, where were you? Said that she woke up every day praying for somebody to come and help. Nobody came. Said she looked at, in front of the brothel, there was all this illegal activity. Nobody was coming and doing anything. She said she wasn't angry at the criminals, the bad guys. She said that they are just bad people doing what bad people do. She said she was angry at the good people, at society, for allowing a 15-year-old girl to be commercially raped 7,000 times. She had AIDS. She was dying. So Geeta pretty much called us all out. She came to realize that the 40,000 people like me that are all over the world, including the United States, is insufficient to have an impact to really address this. For us to really make a difference, we as human beings have to step up and get involved, and to draw a line in the sand and say it's unacceptable for 6.3 million women and girls and boys to be in this kind of a situation. I mean, just think about in New Jersey, if, you heard of a rape case, everybody's talking about it and everybody's wanting to do something. What we're talking about here is 6.3 million women and girls who are forced to have sex against their will, which is commercial rape, anywhere from 2 to 20 times a day. Do the math associated with that. Let's say the average is 10. That's, 63 million rapes on a daily basis, every day. How is it that this can exist in this world? And the numbers in the United States are high. There's a lot of young girls under the age of 18 who would be human trafficking victims this is happening to them every single day. How is it this possible? I don't get it. I don't get it.
I don't get it either. So, Matt, for anybody listening who wants to either get involved because they have a business in the hospitality or banking industry, or just a human, right? How should they get involved with talking to you and making a difference wherever they are in the world?
Well, I mean, they can contact me directly. You can post my email address there. Anyone who's interested in volunteering, I have a lot of people who basically I work with who are volunteers. There include bankers and marketers and salespeople, university students. In fact, my youngest volunteer was 9 years old. This girl said she saw me in a documentary. I don't know how she got my email address. She was from the Midwest, and she contacted me and said, "Mr. Friedman, I'm 9 years old, and I see here that human trafficking is bad, and I want to help." I said, "Well, you're 9 years old." She said, "So what?" I said, "You're 9 years old." She said, 9-year-olds are the new 16-year-olds. Give me a chance. So I said, "What is it that you can do?" And she said, "I can find anything on the internet. That's my God-given gift." And so I had a couple of second-year Ivy League interns that worked for me, and they couldn't find this. I gave it to her, and 2 days later, I had everything I needed. Because each of us has a gift that's given to us. It could be public speaking. It could be a podcast facilitator. It could be writing. It could be networking. It could be anything. And if you apply that to volunteerism, then it really does make a difference. And so this book, Be the Hero, Be the Change, just helps people to kind of get over the line, because a lot of us feel a certain emptiness or lack of purpose, and maybe we have a pretty good life and we feel like we're taking, we're not giving anything back. If you get over that line and you start stepping up and doing so, it changes your life. The endorphins go off in your mind. You start feeling good about yourself. But people don't recognize that until they are actually kind of exposed to that. So
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. I am pretty messed up emotionally right now, and it's a wake up call. And I knew the problem was there and it was bad, but when you're a parent, it just hits differently. So, Matt, I thank you so much for being here, and for everybody listening, please do something. Please do
Well, thank
something.
you very much for amplifying this. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And if there's anything I can do to support the people in your audience, I'm happy to do so.
I appreciate it, definitely. And I will be making as much noise as I possibly can, because it is shameful and it's quite heartbreaking that this
Yes.
is still going on in this beautiful world that we have.
Yes,
And it takes all of us. It really does. So
that's great.
for anybody listening to us, we will make Matt's information available in the show notes, and everywhere you can contact him, and also amplify the voice and get involved. So Matt, I usually ask my guests to leave a few golden nuggets for our listeners. What would you want the average young person, parent, guardian, or just family member to know or take from this conversation you and I are having?
Well, I had cancer about 5 years ago, prostate cancer. It was pretty serious and I could have died. And it was probably one of the best things that happened to me, because I then woke up from the operation and I had survived. And then I realized, well, we die. We don't have this endless life. I think a lot of us think that we're immortal. And every day I wake up and saying, wow, I cherish life. Life is great. Life is wonderful. I think people need to take stock of their life. I think they have to every once in a while stop and think about where they are, what they want out of life, where they want to be on a regular basis, and focus on the good things, the love and the empathy and the kindness and the caring, and be part of the solution of healing a world that is filled with all kinds of negative aspects. The world can be much better, but it's only going to become much better if we collectively kind of decide that the world is going to be better, and then kind of use your behavior and the things that you do and model these actions, kindness and compassion and empathy and love. That's my advice. And I can say that as a person who felt like maybe I wouldn't be on this earth, but all those other distractions and things that aren't important, when you think about, like, there's a lot of people suffering out there, we need to be there for each other. And I'm a Christian, and these are Christian values that I live by. It doesn't matter what faith you are; you have the same values. Let's just see if we can make the world a better place.
Thank you for that. And we all have a part to play. And if you want a difference and a change, be the change you want to see in the world.
That's right.
And it starts with you, it starts in your own corner, your own village, your community, whatever town, city, whatever it is, be the change you want to see. And somebody's waiting for you, like Gita. There's a Gita in the world waiting for you, and wondering why you're taking so long. Not everybody has the support that you feel comes naturally. Not everybody has that. And that there's somebody actively waiting for an angel. Be that angel for somebody. That's what I can add to that. Even he said it all. Matt said it all. Matt, again, I am very grateful for all the work you've done in the world. I'm grateful for you being here and having this conversation, telling these stories. Could have kept it. You could have stopped this work. You really could have stopped. But you continued, and I really, really am thankful for you and the work that you do and you stepping into this calling. I thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for being here. And please take care of yourself and be a good human. All right? Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Unshelling Medicine Podcast. If you want to stay up to date with the latest episodes, make sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to leave us a review. Follow us on social media at Altruistic Scribe on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We share additional tips, updates, and health-related content that you won't want to miss. Have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes? Reach out to us at altruisticscribeco.com. We're always eager to hear from our listeners and tackle the health topics that matter most to you. Until next time, stay healthy and take care.